Interesting one, this. I mentioned this just at the very beginning. Members of Britain's largest teaching union have told teachers there is no legal definition of biological sex. Wow, these people are making stuff up now. It flies in the face, of course, of the Supreme Court guidance, which was handed down in April. Meanwhile, the House of Lords canteen has been slammed for serving a rainbow-coloured pride crumble. Well, you're nothing without a pride crumble, are you? Wouldn't that look a bit icky? You want your crumble to look like a flipping crumble. I don't want it to be any colour, rainbow or otherwise. Campaigners have questioned whether the colourful dessert was made in protest to progress pride flags that were removed from the cafeteria earlier in the week. To speak on these issues, Zoe Strimple is a historian, author, newspaper columnist and broadcaster. Zoe, good afternoon to you.
Hi there. Nice to have so many titles today.
Indeed. We covered the lot there. We wouldn't have put all of that on a name badge, would you? Nice to have you with us. Listen, this is chapter 7,406 on The World's Gone Mad, I guess. And here we have a teaching union who are telling teachers actually there's no legal definition of biological sex when literally half an hour ago the Supreme Court said there is.
Well, I mean, the Supreme Court ruling has not been taken up in the clear-cut way that many people hope. For instance, I'm quite the swimmer at the ladies' pond on Hampstead Heath, where there's been a lot of uproar about trans women coming in, excuse me. And then there's, potentially protest plan because there was a hope that after the Supreme Court ruling, it would immediately be clear that those trans women could not come in anymore. And that's not what's happened. So unfortunately, people are feeling that they can that the Supreme Court ruling is just a piece of another piece of subjective opinion.
I think that's
kind of how it's being treated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As if the people that have been advocating the very opposite to that ruling, it appears to me, simply cannot get their head around that this is a legal ruling, and therefore has decided to sort of define it as kind of like a bit of an optional extra. Well, they might say that over there at the Supreme Court, but in the real world, this is how we do business.
Well, I think the problem with the Supreme Court, well, that's right. And that is how it is, because the Supreme Court I suppose, has just given a kind of strength or clarity to rules that, hospitals, prisons, schools may want to make. But ultimately, it's discretionary, isn't it? So possibly not in the case of the prisons and the hospitals and the schools, but in the case of how a union conducts itself or any kind of private organization. But actually, the City of London runs the ladies' pond. So, they seem to feel they can make their own choices. So I suppose, unfortunately, it's a little bit unclear what people are supposed to do with the Supreme Court ruling, which is apparently slightly more like guidance than if you don't do it, you're breaking the law. So that's not what it's about. In terms of what the Supreme Court's point was, of course, all the kind of trans law, sort of ideology diehards aren't going to be deterred by anything like that. So, in as much as it is still discretionary in sort of private settings, that's what's going on. But I think what's so bizarre is just the way that the unions are so convinced that this is the path to human rights. And anyone these poor academics who showed a film that sounded like it was completely, maybe would have ruffled feathers, but completely fair play, were kind of platformed, and protesters went at them and the unions encouraged that. And then, to them, they felt that other members of the community's human rights were being threatened. And I think that is, as you say, the kind of world's going mad situation that we're in, that somehow saying a biological woman is a sign of violating people's human rights. To say, even if you're not nobody's saying trans people shouldn't be treated with respect and with dignity. But, well, that seems to be, I mean, there is obviously a lot of politics in this, and I do note as well, Zoe, and I'm sure it's not lost on you, that quite a lot of the people advocating this kind of upside-down world are actually sort of just straight white blokes as well. I mean, I wouldn't say perfectly sane straight white blokes, but they don't all see. It's not so much, I don't sense this comes from the average trans person. This comes from agitators and campaigners who are quite ferocious in their methodology. We've seen some of the scenes at different protests, the sort of language that is used. It's almost advocating a parallel
existence in life that most people don't recognize, but for some reason they do?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, what the makeup of these kind of passionate lobbyists is. I mean, I think it's a fair mix, but whatever, it is, we do know that the kind of formerly loony left has moved into the center and has picked up all sorts of people on its way. And I think you see the identical dynamics at play with the Palestine stuff, where, and the environmental activism.
Yeah.
And you just see all sort of Toms, Dicks, and Harrys who have absolutely nothing to do with the cause and don't seem to really understand any of it, really, devoting their entire lives to it as if it's like the most important life and death situation for them and their so-called communities.
Yeah.
And it's really distressing to see. But as I say, it's the same dynamics, whether it's the trans, fanaticism or the Palestine fanaticism or the green fanaticism. None of it's about the actual issues.
No, every time. And you'll find probably the same faces at the similar protests and things like that. It's kind of, it seems to me it comes from a sort of, ultra left-wing place that these people are disruptors more than anything. They hate, they're anti-establishment characters who can't get out of bed in the morning unless they think there's a drop of iniquity in the air, and that's what gets them motivated, and that's what fires them along to advance whatever cause they choose that particular day. And I was thinking about, the identity politics of all of this. We see it we're in Pride Month at the moment. I did notice one comedian online was asking the question, not unreasonably, I can't remember who it was now, why is there a whole month for this? Martin Luther King gets a day, and look what he did. But if you happen to be gay, you get a whole month. I mean, what sort of justice is that?
Well, I wouldn't say that the cause of African-American or Black history or civil rights is exactly getting short shrift at this point.
That's a fair point. But I think the point was made was that the identity politics of the world we live in is overwhelming at the moment.
The gay, of course. I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, the gay rights thing seems to be a little bit of a breakaway now from the trans rights. They do seem fairly separate, although there is obviously some overlap in the kind of activist world, although there's also a lot of tension in that. But I would say, just going back to the underlying reasons, I actually don't agree that it's just people who want to kind of join a kind of pro-underdog fray. I would say that there's a pattern to the madness, which is that let's look at who's the butt of the trans movement. It's biological women. And let's look at who's the victim in the Palestine activism movement, Jews. And I think it's often, I mean, you wouldn't believe the anti-Semitism and sexism I face on a kind of regular basis. It is just Hitler grade stuff. And I think that there's a pattern. There's a reason that people who like to think of themselves as virtuous are drawn to things that are actually very unvirtuous. Now, I don't think necessarily all these people are consciously misogynistic or anti-Semitic or anything like that, but I do think it's no coincidence that the passion heads in those directions.
But that's because they think they're punching up, isn't it? So as far as they're concerned, they've defined you. You're no better than Pol Pot, for goodness sake. You might as well be Saddam Hussein. No one would tell anyone off for having a pop at them. And once you've been defined in their world as one of those figures, that's how they think of it. So having a pop at any aspect of your life, no matter how horrendous, and I would imagine, I can't imagine what it feels like as a female in that respect, but I can only glean from what I read the kind of stuff which is about as horrendous, repugnant and as violent as it can get. That stuff is done with impunity because, well, you're the bad guy.
Well, and there's an intriguing, connection to make back to the trans activism, which is really, it can be really, well, not just the trans, but the Palestine stuff. It can be really illegal in some of its manifestations, but certainly very hostile, sometimes inciting, borderline. But we have all these stories of, the likes of Alison Pearson, my colleague at the Telegraph, having the police turn up at her doorstep on Remembrance Sunday for a tweet that was, not that bad. And certainly nothing like what I get on a regular basis. And ditto misgendering, that
it's a bad thing.
Kind of a thought hate crime or whatever they're called. Meanwhile, unbelievable amounts of just unbridled incitement and anti-Semitism and misogyny just churns through the system, directly targeting people like me or just flying around. And that stuff somehow is not picked up by police or
I don't think I've ever. In fact, you put it really well, Zoe, because I can't really recall the amount of. We talked about Alison's case and the two parents that found themselves having their door almost broken down because they dared to say something on a WhatsApp group. For goodness' sake, the former police officer that was arrested by his own former force for something he literally didn't say on social media. But I don't think I've ever seen a case of somebody saying, we've arrested Mick in Haywards Heath because he threw this horrendous anti-Semitic, sexist, violent tweet towards Zoe, and therefore we've sent 6 of us down there and put him in the back of a van. I've never read that story.
Well, I'll tell you, I have actually tried to get the police interested in some of the material that has been sent to me, just as partly out of interest. If the kind of all the policing of hate crime and non-crime hate incidents only applies to issues of misgendering and purported racism and sort of anti-trans stuff, and it does. The police, they go through a few throat-clearing motions, but at the end of the day, the advice I just get is be careful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
careful.
We have 2-tier justice. It all ties in. It's all part of the same. This stuff with the union and the denial of the biological. This is all part of the same. Madness pie. that we're all.
Well, yeah, or crumble for that matter.
Crumble, yeah. Yes. Actually, I thought that sounded quite good. I would be very up for a multi.
I think that just makes you all shades of weird, Zoe. Nobody should be messing with our crumble.
Well, you can have your normal crumble. There's room for both.
But you can't eat it. You can have your crumble, but you can't eat it. There it is. Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is with crumble, it's got to look like breadcrumbs on the top, hasn't it? Not like some kind of liquidized Kermit the Frog.
I think the liquidized Kermit the Frog sounds fun. I am up for some some crumble experimentation, but I do understand that it won't be for everyone.
Crumble experimentation is good. Liquidizing Muppets, not so good. We'll have the thought police after us at this rate, Zoe. Goodness me, for hate crimes against puppetry. Nobody wants to see. Nobody wants to see that. Listen.
No, I'm hiding. Yeah.
Great to have you on, Zoe. We'll speak again, I'm sure. Zoe Strimple, historian, author, newspaper columnist and broadcaster. It's a great point that she raised there. You don't see any of those incidents in this area, in this field, if you look at the kind of hatred that certainly females get on such a regular basis. J.K. Rowling would be an obvious example. I mean, J.K. Rowling doesn't state anything controversial that I've ever read. She just basically lays out some rather obvious facts and sometimes emphasises those facts with a little bit of humour. Often there's a little challenge in there to somebody who's been a bit naughty, but she's an intelligent professional woman that isn't making stuff up. And yet the kind of stuff that is said is so... It's kind of, I mean, Zoe just said, she was speaking about anti-Semitic stuff, sort of Hitler level. It is that. I mean, it's sort of beyond almost. But I never heard anybody getting a knock at the door for that stuff. That seems to kind of curious. You get a free pass. What is the criteria for being a victim of this nonsense? If it isn't some of that stuff, then what the hell is?